A woman named Mary Mallon, born in Northern Ireland, migrated to the United States between 1883 and 1884. In the year 1900, Mary began working as a cook for many affluent families in the New York area. Within 2 weeks of her employment with the family in Mamaroneck, New York, residents developed typhoid fever, a bacterial infection due to specific types of salmonella. A year later, she moved to Manhattan and started working for a new family. Members of this new family started to develop fevers and diarrhea, and eventually, one of her co-workers died. She moved on to work for a lawyer and his family, where 7 out of the 8 people living at the residence became ill. 2 weeks after Mary began working for them, Mary worked for 3 more families, that resulted in similar occurrences. During the summer of 1906, Mary began work as a cook for a wealthy banker and his family of 11. Over the next week, 6 members of the family came down with typhoid fever. By the end of 1906, typhoid researcher George Soper suspected Mary, and published his findings in the American Medical Association. But because Mary changed jobs so frequently, Soper was unable to locate her right away. Finally, Soper found Mary Mallon, who was working as a cook for a family living in a penthouse on Park Avenue. Her work there resulted in the death of a daughter in the family. Soper requested samples from Mary to test, but she refused. By 1908, Mary had attracted so much attention that she was referred to in the Journal of American Medical Association as Typhoid Mary, and was wrote about in the newspapers as well. It wasn't long before local authorities took her into custody. She was forced to provide urine and stool samples. Although it was suggested to her that she remove her gallbladder, which at the time was thought to harbor the bacteria, she refused and expressed that she still wanted to work as a cook. The New York City health inspector determined she was a carrier of the bacteria, but didn't show symptoms, and she was held in isolation for 3 years at a clinic on a nearby island. After a while, the New York State Commissioner of Health, Eugene H. Porter, decreed that if all carriers promised to take reasonable hygienic precautions and not work in any food industry, they may be freed. In 1910, Mary Mallon signed an affidavit that she would change careers and agreed to take extra care not to spread the infection. Once released, she took a job as a laundress. After finding that it didn't pay as well as being a cook, she changed her name to Mary Brown, and resumed her duties in the kitchens of New York's families, breaking her promise. The final casualties found their demise at Sloan Hospital for Women in New York City in 1915. 25 people were infected, 2 passed away from the infection. Although she fled as always, authorities were able to catch up with her. She was returned to quarantine in March 1915, and still refused to have her gallbladder removed. She never escaped her imprisonment, but she found some notoriety while in her confinement. She was occasionally interviewed by the media, whom were told to accept nothing from her. She died November 11 in 1938 of pneumonia. She was 69. She was cremated and her ashes reside at St. Raymond's Cemetery in the Bronx. Today, researchers know more about asymptomatic carriers such as Typhoid Mary. Should an individual come in contact with the bacteria and survive a spell of typhoid fever, they may become immune to the symptoms but still shed the bacteria through their feces and urine. It is theorized that a specific dessert Mary made, ice cream made with raw-cut peaches, was the culprit in the transference of bacteria, since mostly everything served is cooked to a temperature hot enough to kill any germs. Some have totaled fatalities attributed to the infections that Mary may have caused to at least 50. Mary Mallon never took responsibility for her roles in any of the infections.